Mahatma Gandhi once described vaccines as a barbarous practice and one of the most fatal delusions. Why did Gandhi, a man of the people and who once aspired to be a doctor himself, say this? And what happened later on in his life when he saw unvaccinated children suffering from the savage disease known as smallpox? Hi, my name is Dr. Aziz. I'm a medical doctor in the UK with also a background in psychology, and we continue today in our journey of exploring vaccines, the way people view them and the reasons why. If you're watching this, there is only one request I have from you: to try and keep an open mind. In this particular episode, we come to British-controlled India in the early 20th century. Mahatma Gandhi, for those who don't know, was a revolutionary figure of the 20th century whose philosophy of non-violent resistance helped end British rule in India, and even today, his influence impacts on modern civil disobedience movements across the world. He was also known for being simple in his way of living and someone in tune with the common people. In 1921, Gandhi, who was a prolific writer, expressed his views vociferously on vaccines. He wrote, "Vaccination is a barbarous practice and it is one of the most fatal of all the delusions current in our time, not to be found even among the so-called savage races of the world. Its supporters seek to impose it with the aid of penal laws and rigorous punishments on all people." Gandhi outlined 5 reasons why vaccines should be opposed. Number 1, the preparation of vaccines involved the suffering of innocent cows, which are of course sacred in Hinduism. On a side note, current mainstream Hindu beliefs do not oppose vaccinations, nor do any of the mainstream religions of the world for that matter. Number 2, vaccinations could spread disease other than smallpox, in Gandhi's opinion. Number 3, the smallpox vaccine could not guarantee immunity. Number 4, that vaccines were filthy. Number 5, that the disease could not be cured by filth. These were Gandhi's opinions and reason for opposing vaccines. But something happened nearly 10 years later, right in front of Gandhi's eyes. In 1930, in a village where Gandhi was present, there was a smallpox outbreak, and he saw several children die after their parents chose not to have them vaccinated, having been influenced by Gandhi's views. Watching this caused heartbreak for Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "I can't sleep. These kiddies are fading away like little buds. I feel the weight of their deaths on my shoulders. I prevailed upon parents not to get them vaccinated. Now the children are passing away. It may be, I am afraid, the result of my ignorance and obstinacy, i.e. being stubborn, and so I feel very unhappy." From that point onwards, Gandhi did not dissuade any parents who wanted to have their children vaccinated. So what can we learn from this, and why did Gandhi oppose vaccinations initially, and why was there a change in heart? If we look at this from a psychological point of view, and indeed the social circumstances, there are indeed several factors at play here. Factors which are still present in many of our behaviours and society today. Firstly, the social context. Remember, the British were a colonial power in India. Vaccination was a treatment that was being imposed with very little cultural consideration. In psychology, this can sometimes result in what's called the boomerang effect, or the theory of psychological resistance, which refers to the unintended consequences of an attempt to persuade, resulting in the adoption of an opposing position instead. It states that attempts to restrict a person's freedom often produces an anti-conformity boomerang effect, i.e. they end up doing the opposite. Think teenagers. This imposition took away the bodily autonomy of the people Gandhi was fighting for. They felt their freedom, already under oppressive British rule, was being further curtailed. Gandhi, and I say this with the utmost respect, and Gandhi himself acknowledged this later on in his life, he demonstrated a psychological phenomenon known as Ultracrepitarianism. This is essentially where individuals give opinions and advice on matters outside of one's knowledge or competence. Just like Robert De Niro and Robert Kennedy, Gandhi was not a doctor or a scientist. He was a lawyer by training and obviously a social activist, but unfortunately made the same mistake that many still make today, delving into commenting and influencing others on a subject that they don't have an understanding in. Regarding smallpox, Gandhi was initially in denial that it was even a contagious disease, but stated that it was in fact caused by blood getting impure due to some disorder of the bowel, and that came out in the form of smallpox. Without going into detail, this is completely wrong. Smallpox is an infectious disease caused by the variola virus. This has been proven beyond doubt, and the blunt truth is vaccines have completely and utterly wiped smallpox off this planet. But interestingly, this phenomenon of ultracrepitarianism, of both imparting opinions outside of one's knowledge and training and following them from unqualified people, still exists today, and unfortunately on a much larger scale due to the internet, smartphones and social media. The next time you receive a forward on your phone, just do yourself a favor and ask, who is sending this? Has it been verified? Where is the evidence, and how do I really know that it's true? Have you experienced receiving bizarre forwards from unqualified people? If so, comment below. Appeal to nature. As part of Gandhi's reasoning, we see the appeal to nature logical fallacy, which basically says that something is good because it's perceived as natural or bad because it's perceived as unnatural. But this is an error in thinking, as mentioned, and not in keeping with science and medicine. Some things can at face value seem not natural, but they do work. For example, administering high voltage electric shocks or injecting someone with synthetically manufactured adrenaline is not exactly quote-unquote natural, but trust me, I've seen it enough times done in front of me and taken part in enough resuscitation to know that they do work. The optimism bias. Next we come to a bias Gandhi seemed to have demonstrated, which is called the optimism bias. This is a cognitive bias, i.e. an error in thinking that states that generally we tend to be too optimistic for our own good. For example, we don't think we ourselves will suffer from cancer or a heart attack, or that we will get divorced, certainly not when we get married anyway. Parents who choose not to get their children vaccinated with the MMR vaccine, for example, often demonstrate this optimism bias in action. They think they are sparing their children the possibility of autism, but really they're not thinking about the risks of measles, mumps and rubella, the very purpose of the vaccine. And until today, children still catch these diseases and then they do still die from them. When I worked on pediatric medicine, we had parents who had chosen to not get their children vaccinated and now were watching their children in hospital potentially dying from a preventable illness. And the same heartbreaking question would always be asked, "Doctor, if I had gotten my child vaccinated, would this be happening?" On a side note, the MMR vaccine to autism link has been completely and utterly debunked by countless independent studies on multiple continents involving over 14 million children, and I'll do a feature on this. The compassion fade. The next phenomenon we see in play is called the compassion fade, which states the level of compassion decreases with an increased number of unidentifiable people suffering from an ailment. Conversely, compassion increases when you have a small number of identifiable victims. This is what happened with Gandhi. When he saw unvaccinated children die right in front of him from smallpox, this opened his eyes, broke his heart, and changed his stance on vaccines. And sadly, we see the same, but often too late, as mentioned previously, when parents see their children suffering or indeed dying from diseases that could have easily been prevented using vaccines. Metathesiophobia. Gandhi also exhibited something that many of us do to different extents, and that is to resist change. It is natural to want routine, to resist any change to our environment, but when it becomes persistent and irrational, and particularly when it's at odds with research and evidence, it can become dangerous. When Gandhi's beloved wife of 62 years, Kasturba Gandhi, was afflicted with a lung infection, doctors advised on the use of antibiotics, specifically penicillin. Given the medication was relatively new and the long-term side effects were not known, in many ways not too different to the COVID mRNA vaccines, Mahatma Gandhi went against the advice of the doctors and rejected the medication for his wife. Sadly, his wife passed away shortly after. Again, credit to the great man Gandhi was, however, he acknowledged his shortcomings and regretted his decisions and changed his stance on modern medicine after this. So none of this is a slight or attack on Mahatma Gandhi himself, and he himself acknowledged a lot of these shortcomings. He did what the vast majority of vaccine hesitant people do, that is to display genuine concern coming from a position of sincerity and often tied in with some level of anxiety, which is understandable. But in doing so, Gandhi sadly made some errors in his thinking, in his suggestions and his influence, which sadly led to the deaths of many others. But more importantly, and perhaps why Gandhi is revered so much, is that credit to him, as mentioned. He realized he was in the wrong. He realized the errors he made regarding vaccines early on in his life, and subsequently he changed his stance, and with that, no doubt, countless lives were saved. Anyway, I hope you learned something useful from this video. I hope you learned that sometimes, particularly that in times of anxiety and uncertainty, when we feel our rights and freedoms are being curbed, it can be easy to make errors in our thinking and follow the wrong advice, consequently putting ourselves and our loved ones at great risk of preventable illness and death. Keep an open mind. That is the first step to making change. If a revolutionary figure such as Gandhi can acknowledge error and change his mindset, then so can we. What has your experience of vaccines been and the different views people have around you? Share your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you have found something in this video useful, hit the like button, subscribe and turn on notifications. This is original stuff, trust me, it's taken countless hours to research. You won't find this anywhere else, unless they copy me. And above all, it's evidence-based material. To my fellow doctors, scientists, and to all human beings, let us not rebuke or castigate others who may be hesitant. Trust me, this doesn't work, and everyone is learning. I leave you with Mahatma Gandhi's famous words, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Until next time, look after yourselves and take care.